Jess Pettitt again, and today we are talking about Chapter 18, the Department of Labor. I'm going to be real honest. This is another one of those chapters that I was like, oh yeah, I know. All right, I don't know anything about the Department of Labor. I have applied for unemployment at one point, so I thought maybe that would have something to do with it. I know about equal employment opportunity. That's involved, but certainly not a bulk of anything. And when we start talking about like specific little rabbit holes, I'm more familiar with like the Bostock case from Supreme Court last year that is probably going to get overturned any second now. That expanded employment discrimination can't be based on gender. And it was using specific trans employees that were fired for being trans. Outside of that, nope, I was totally unprepared for anything the chapter talked about. And so I called in my friend, Joshua V. Barr, who conveniently is a genius. 2, this is his area of expertise. And 3, he's dumb enough to say yes. Joshua, thank you for coming back.
Hey, good to be back. Good to be back.
Um, is there something that you need to get off your chest ASAP,
You
burning a hole
know,
in your pocket?
I have a surprising hot take with this one.
Ooh, let's go.
A surprising hot take. Once you get out of the first few pages of this chapter, it isn't as bad as you think it may be. Because there were certain things that I actually aligned with when reading Jonathan Barry, what he wrote. And some of those things were, restoring apprenticeship programs. Workforce training grants, utilizing grants for people that don't want to go to college, on-site daycare, and uh, trying to make an incentive to make sure we're actually hiring, Americans rather than seeking people out of the country. There were certain things I read, and I was like, yeah, we definitely need more on-site daycare. That needs to be
Yep.
something. The connection between a parent and child. I align with that
Sign me
all
up.
day. Yeah. Yeah. So
I appreciate it because I think I really am trying to be charitable, even if it's sarcastic about how badly most of these chapters are written. But
hmm
there is some stuff in there, like most of these conversations I have with Trump supporters or even sometimes QAnon supporters, right? Like, yeah, education needs to be really looked at.
Right. Yeah.
Sure.
100%. I will align with
Medical
you there.
medical care in the United States,
Right.
problematic. Yep,
Right.
sure.
Yeah. 100%.
Biden is a lizard. No, no,
No, right.
that's too
Right.
far. We got too
Right.
far. So I really appreciate you being able to do that inside the labor chapter because number one, I'm self-employed. I do not have any employees. I have been fired from every job I've ever had, and now that was 20 years ago.
hmm
So I think your average person, we live in capitalism, so labor being their physical, mental, spiritual abilities being traded in
Right.
for money so that someone else can make a profit off of it. Welcome to capitalism.
Right. That's
Don't
literally what
know.
capitalism is. Yeah.
Right. I don't know that most people really know what's happening. So to be able to see some of the good things, one is charitable and I think is optimistic, but mostly I think most of us have no idea what we're talking about. So
Right. And I agree with you. I think, even when you read the start of the chapter, he gives he said the role of labor is twofold in the American economy.
mhm.
And he says, give workers the support they need for rewarding, self-paying, self-driven careers. Okay, thumbs up right there. I'm with you right there.
And
Now, but then
here
you
comes the lizard part.
all right, yeah, but then it's always you take another step, and I'm like, whoa, slow down, like
Right.
you know, it's important to talk about not just the Department of Labor, but the ability to work in an American capitalist system. Because if you don't work, you don't eat. So
Right.
I mean, so we have to be able to, and all animals have to put forth some effort some effort of work in order to eat. Unfortunately, at least in my opinion, unfortunately, we have put in the middleman of instead of actually going out and doing the direct work, I work for somebody, get money, then go get the food. Now, so our so talking about labor. in the agencies that fall under labor, which is the Department of Labor, the EEOC, where I have a lot of experience, the National Labor Relations Board, the National Mediation Board, and in the Pension Benefit Corporation. You have to talk about these things because it affects your life. Nothing affects your life in a capitalist system more than your ability to work, get a job, and provide for your family.
100% well stated. So I want to back up just a little bit because
Hmm.
the way you set it up is perfect, right? So this chapter identifies the number one goal of the Department of Labor is to support the American worker. So obviously we are talking about what do we mean by American worker? Okay,
Right. Yeah. See,
right?
that's what I'm saying. You got to
Right.
dive into the weeds. Right.
So that's where my brain went, right? Is that like, oh, now we're getting into like immigration issues, etc., people with visas, like, all right, Department of Labor. Then the lizard shows up. And the lizard is defining the American worker's needs to be God,
Yeah.
neighbor,
Judeo-Christian. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. You see,
God,
yeah,
neighbor,
exactly.
and family. And
Yeah. Yeah. See, that's where it gets tricky. That's what I'm saying.
it
It's
has
saying,
been like there's too many commas, right? You
right,
should have edited
exactly.
that sentence down.
That's the trick of this chapter.
Yep.
And you read that first part of that sentence, you're like, yeah, but then you did it go like, no, like,
Right.
why are you putting everybody in the same box as you,
Right.
Jonathan Barry? And then the
Because
first.
that's, I mean, because he accidentally was too truthful as to who he's actually focusing on.
Right. Yeah. And see, and that's the trick to this chapter. I don't even want to say trick. That's the issue with this chapter is it's it sounds good. I think the good thing though, the thing I would say though is he comes out swinging when he defines what it means to be American in regards to religion and sexual
And
orientation
it's
and race
Protestant,
and
not
sex.
Catholic. Just to be clear, when we
Yeah.
talk about prioritizing traditional Christian families, it is Protestant, heterosexual,
Right.
married,
Right.
man is the breadwinner, the mother, who doesn't even get to be a woman, she's just a mother, is the
Hmm.
child care provider.
Right.
Kids they have conceived
Right.
and their
Right.
ability to work.
Right. And he doesn't blatantly say it that way all at once, but the first few pages, once you start reading, you're like, okay, yeah, I see how you're trying to define this. Now, once he gets past the DEI rhetoric and then starts to fall into like what a workplace should look like, then I'm like, okay, yeah, I actually agree with that point. I actually agree with that point. That one, maybe not so much. It's like. But yeah, it's those
Yeah.
definitions, and it's like who is American and who
Yeah.
falls
It's
under
like,
these protections is
it,
what's
it,
dangerous
yeah,
about this chapter. Yeah.
if I were boarding an airplane and someone sits down next to me with way too much cologne, it is very hard to find out that they are like a nice, funny guy that I can at least talk to, right? Like, so we get through the cologne. So, okay, all labor regulations would prioritize traditional Christian families only, right? This is from Stop the Coup 2025. Two, protections for LGBTQ plus employees eliminate. Who needs that? They're discriminatory. Remember, by pointing out inequitable experiences or opportunities, you are then discriminating against the people who supposedly are being privileged.
Right.
That is not my viewpoint, asterisk. That's like a theme throughout Heritage Foundation. Number three, the impact of race can no longer be considered in discrimination cases because that's racist, right? Like, remember where we're coming from. And last but not least, regulations to protect the government, reduce them, if not remove them. In exchange, and now this is where we've gotten past the cologne, right? So now we're getting in there. We're talking about labor conflicts, so that implies unions,
Yeah,
except
our
for
union-ish kind of group, which is actually he's saying that the workforce needs more of a voice, which
right,
I agree with him 100%. They don't have enough. There's not enough voice. There's not enough voices for the American. He can't use the word American worker. I would be like, yeah, there
right,
you go.
except only a certain American worker is getting this t-shirt. So even though we would agree, they don't want to hear from our voices. They want to hear from the voices that they determine have the
Right, right.
civil rights, but only for them. The
And when
modern,
we say them, we want to make sure we're talking about Christian,
yeah,
family, Christian
God,
nuclear Western European families that are of European descent.
which those realities are boiled down to God, neighbor, and family. So that like a lot of people would sign on to God, neighbor, and family, but careful, read the
Right. You got to pay it. You got to read between the
read the
lines
fine
a
print.
lot
Right.
in this chapter. Yes.
So
Yes.
modern workplace, where we're talking about HR, climate change, and unions, was not expecting that to be in there, but it's in there, but only in this heavy cologne way. So like this isn't a chapter you can read while making dinner. You got to like
No.
really pay
You
attention.
got to really pay attention here, and there's a lot here. It's a very dense chapter, but it's actually a pretty interesting read. I don't want to say good, but it's very interesting
Yeah.
all the way through. So
Okay, so here is a list of acronyms that I sort of maybe have heard of, but mostly didn't. But then once I knew what they stood for, I was like, oh wait, oh wait, oh wait, oh wait. Okay, so the Department of Labor, DOL. EEOC is the Equal Employment Opportunity.
mm,
Then there's
commission.
a mediation board, which
Mm,
is NLRB. Oh no, I did that wrong. NLRB is Labor Relations Board.
right.
NMB is the mediation board around labor conflict. FMCS is the mediation and conciliation, which basically across the board, they're removing the federal level involvement in supporting people through a process or supporting people out of a process. And then last but not least is the pension benefit guarantee, PBEC. Um, Obviously we're reversing this pesky DEI revolution.
Yeah, that's what they start out at once they talk about reforms.
Huh.
Yes.
And that's so notice how specific that word is, but how like vague the cologne is, right? They also define the DEI revolution as race, sex, and CRT, but reaffirm that non-discrimination and equality is the law because they feel discriminated against and that they are receiving inequitable opportunities. They're reinforcing the law to not do discrimination against them. So they're not eradicating the law. They just want the law to apply to them because they don't understand power.
But when you read a little deeper,
Here we
and
go.
you hinted at it before, they actually want to do away with race. Like when you look at it further, they're like, we got to get rid of disparate impact. It's done. Like the emphasis should be on religious protection, and sex, but they're pregnancy. Like they get again. I think it's like the next page. Once you dive in, they're like, "All right, we shouldn't discriminate on race." Yeah, yeah, yeah. But we should not focus on that either.
Right.
So they want to live in a society, even though this was a country that was founded on the stealing and eradication of a certain people in the working of the land by another people for a select group that we're talking about right now. They think that race should just be done with.
Right.
So
Which here's another example of like where the lizard shows up, right? Is that um similar to this is my hot take. So please challenge me if I'm crazy.
mhm.
So like we don't need affirmative action anymore. We don't need voter protection anymore. We don't need civil rights anymore because we live in a world where we shouldn't need that. I completely agree. However, here's my lizard. We don't live in that world.
Right, exactly. We don't live in that world. We don't live
Like,
in that world.
but they don't get to that part of the paragraph, right? So
Right,
like they could be like agree, 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 and then also not agree with me.
right.
I
And
can
see,
be
but
agree, 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 and then
here's
don't
one
agree.
way that they kind of justify that race discrimination is over. And Jonathan Berry, surprisingly, doesn't provide any data. He just makes a blanket statement.
Oh yeah, there's very few citations, but here's
Yeah,
the bonus. If there are citations, they're just self-serving articles the author wrote.
right.
That's not how citations really supposed to
So
work.
he says that race discrimination should be done away with, especially disparate impact on race. And disparate impact is neutral written policies that have an adverse impact on a certain group of people. He says that we should do away with that because there are a lot of interracial marriages. Therefore, racial like all right. First of all, where's your data? I mean, yes. Have I seen interracial? But the data shows that the majority of people marry into same race. I mean, and I don't think we have enough of an interracial coalition through marriage that is equaled out the economic portion, which again, when you talk about labor, you have to talk about economics.
Right.
I didn't agree with his premise of why
But
that should
it
be
is
done.
interesting though that like if you're pulling at straws to justify your claims, how threatened by interracial marriage are you that if you think it's been like some kind of massive tipping point?
Right. And it's not. It's not, by the
Right. Right, not
way.
at all. But when we this is where I think people need to be careful. Like ultimately the point of these videos, right, is like what can normal people do at the dinner table? And what it is be careful at dismissing an entire argument because there might be something you could agree with,
Right.
while also noting that you might agree with something and then be like, wait, that is not what I thought you meant.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
I would love to get rid of disparity, but what they want to do is get rid of like finding the disparity.
Hmm.
Because similar to it reminds me when COVID during COVID when Trump didn't want to do testing because if you don't know your status, then you don't know your status, so it don't count. No, it actually still counts. You just are ignorant to it. That's the divide. Okay, I'm getting too specific. Okay, so Title 7, prohibition of racial classification and quotas, eliminating EEO1 data entirely. I was on a podcast yesterday that was talking about limiting, like counting any kind of specific demographic based data. And then I was asked, okay, if we take away this data, what are we supposed to do? And what I answered was number one, there are places that weren't ever counting. There are also places that once they count, they get to a place and then they're done. And there's other people who only count and don't do anything else. So removing the counting, I would say first off, if you still want to be counting for a reason that makes sense, do it on your own and don't outsource it to something else. And number two, there's other kinds of work to do to address disparity or workplace culture that doesn't involve the federal government keeping demographic data. And the example that I used in another one of these conversations was when there was the last census, which PS is coming out during this next presidency. Yikes. But LGBT wasn't added to the census. It wasn't a question. And so queer people decorated our census envelopes that we mailed back in to be able to like visually showcase even though it's not being counted, right? So like counting is not the only thing. Getting rid of it just puts the responsibility someplace else if you even meant it in the first place. So the last thing I'll get off my soapbox and let you come back is one of the first things I say in a lot of my talks is that a lot of diversity strategic plans say what something like increase diversity by 13%. Well, great, except what's your starting place? And if you don't know your starting place, you just made that up. Why 13%? By when and how and for what purpose? So even eradicating a thing does not mean that it dismantles all of this work, because most of this work has been really sketchy scaffolding to begin with. I will step down now.
Yeah, I think on the data collection, at least the way Jonathan Berry approaches it, um, is he rereads it in a way where it's like EOC or any civil rights enforcement office utilizes the numbers to sometimes justify that discrimination may have occurred under the disparate impact theory. So, as someone who has done these cases and has used the data of an office and a community, see this is where he trips up, and a community to say you are discriminating. So I've had cases where,
Yes, actual lawyer here.
yeah,
I was a ceramics major. Yeah.
yeah. So I've had cases where an office has not hired someone and the person, alleges racial discrimination. You look at the data and you look at the person's credentials versus the person who got the job, and you say, and I'll give a real case that I've had, real case. Lady used to work for the Secret Service, wants to move back to South Carolina to take care of her mother who has gotten sick. She applies to be a police officer at an agency. Uh, she doesn't get the job. Now, she's got military experience. She's worked with the Secret Service. She doesn't get the job. The person who gets the job is the daughter of the chief of police in the neighboring town. Has no experience other than she's connected. You look at the data for the office, 96% of the people that work in this police office are of European white descent.
Mhm.
You look at the town, though, 60% of the people that live in this town are black.
It sounds like Ferguson, Missouri.
This black lady whose mother lives in that town wants to come back and move to this area, work for the police force, is denied. And she has all the merits in the work. Because this is the word, this is the new word, merit. Merit. So she has all the merits in the world, but the chief of police daughter in the neighboring town is the one who gets that. We use the data to show, hey, that's part of a justification. Your office, who serves the community, and this is again a point people have to understand: the most accessible person in government happens to have a license to kill, and in this office, or a license to use deadly force, in case someone wants to fact check. A license to use deadly force. In this office, this person is able, this office, 96% of the people in the office are white, serving a town with 60% of the people are black. And there's one black woman who is overqualified, more qualified than the chief of police, can't even be an officer. I need that data. I need the data to see, are you actually trying to eradicate racial discrimination? Because that is discrimination. And
Right.
if you take away this data saying, oh, we don't need it now, you're doing yourself a disjustice beyond so-called DEI measures. And I'm saying beyond because the first thing it was we wanted to eradicate racism. That's what the Civil Rights Act was all about. Well, it's hard to do that, especially when you talk about, again, we're in the Department of Labor chapter. When someone wants a job, again, they need a job in order to get money, in order to eat, put a roof over their head, clothes, etc. And they apply for a job, they are overqualified, and the two white chief police decide to use nepotism to put their person forward. This is what the Civil Rights Act was all about breaking down. So when you try to say we should just do away with, no, no, no. Because I need to understand your data to see if you're actually putting in the work to create this so-called colorblind society that we live in. Because because of the way this country and the history of this country was set up, certain groups got advantages in regards to education, in regards to opportunity, and they continue to deny people, even with the credits, even with the education, even with the experience, the ability to get in simply because of color of skin. And I need to know this data because I need to see, are you actually paying attention to what's in your community in regards to making sure that we live in a country of liberty and justice for all, regardless of color of skin, but race in a racist society still matters. And so I don't think we should get rid or eliminate data collection because we need to understand because this country was founded on racism and we have yet to break the mold yet.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't think it's a good idea. I also think that because this podcast was for organizations, that they probably weren't using it or doing it well inside their own organizations or workplaces. On a federal level, they're getting rid of it so that they don't have to be held accountable to
Right.
racism, right? And then you brought up mostly like immutable characteristics. So that I just want to identify that those that would be more mutable, right? Like gender identity or sexual orientation or economic class or religious identification, those things can change and evolve over time. That's as he would say woke nonsense because he only focus well Heritage Foundation only focuses on immutable characteristics, but even how those have been identified have changed over history.
Mm-hmm.
But those identities that are definitely fluid and changeable, and you have to come out, this is why visibility is so important. And so the counting of what is visible in mutable characteristics is almost always off because it's only the ones that are saying, hi, I'm one of these people, right? So when we are eradicating based on sex, gender, counting of anything, it it actually impacts every single person, not just people of color, not just queer people, not just trans people, but whether or not you are a married family with children or you are a single person. That might be a mutable change that is actually going to occur in your life. So then if we're kind of having this esoteric conversation and the people who are avoiding putting their laundry away are watching this video are upper class educated white people, the mutable characteristics in your life matter at that stage in your life. So this is talking about you. This isn't just put on a t-shirt and advocate for other people. This is all of us. And that the counting in those patterns is how we're going to be able to hold someone accountable. So he does state that specifically in talking about executive orders that are trying to be rescinded or probably have already been rescinded, and Bostock specifically, that these non-discrimination things should only be at the time of hiring and firing only,
Mm-hmm.
promotion or recommendation or anything like that. But rescinding all of this data is going to be very hard to prove anything about what workplace culture or work experience was inside of a job if you can get through to your point of your case example, which is wonderful, nepotism to begin with. Once you're in there, you could be driven out or ignored or demoted or over.
Mm-hmm.
The data
Right.
is there too.
And that's why the data matters. Like
Yeah.
it matters who you're hiring, who's moving up. Do you have a system that says we are diverse and care on the outside, but once you look under that veil, like what's really happening there? You need that data, in especially in civil rights investigations, to do that because without that data, it's harder to build a case to say yes, you are discriminated against.
Right.
Which again, probably to the Heritage Foundation and Manhattan Project. That's probably what they want. Yeah, it's hard to get. How do you prove it? Like we
Yeah.
need the
But it's
data.
also, I mean, if we look at the fear tactics that are being used, right? Like, let's take, for example, trans prisoners receiving reassignment surgeries being paid for by the prison system, right? Like, the two human beings in the history of the United States have received some kind of medical care related to something tangentially related to sexual reassignment surgery. One of them was actually a life-saving surgery due to a self-mutilation, and the other one was something that was more specific, probably more intersex related to from what I can find. Two people. You can't make a national fury of fear if you actually know the numbers because that's not millions of thousands of people,
Hmm.
right? Not, and it doesn't matter that whether it's zero people, we're talking about people's access to healthcare. They don't care about that. If we eradicate the numbers, we can be scared of stuff and we can hide stuff.
Hmm.
There you go. Snappy snappies. Woke nonsense. All right, let's keep going. Um, any federal benefits, which they're taking out regulations and moving them to the states, but there are also strong recommendations that certainly for federal employees or state employees, there's no benefits for abortion or surrogacy, pregnancy, childbirth, maternity, or adoption. However, the American worker, as identified, see above, deserve these benefits, but it would be up to the individual organization because there's no regulations mandating it or setting any kind of like guidance standards. Did you extrapolate that out too?
Well, I mean, I think again, it comes down to, my opinion. My opinion is, they want to promote a pro-birth. I don't like to say pro-life. Pro-birth accommodation for mothers, and they don't view abortion or elective abortion as health care.
Right.
They for them, they want protections for pregnancy, childbirth, and healthcare should cover those conditions. Nothing else should be included. And
Except for the record, there's a little gem inside of DHHS's chapter that
mhm.
miscarriage treatment and ectopic pregnancy medical care should never be conflated with abortion.
Yeah, Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
that's great news. Look at me. I could agree with that. Thank you. Texas, read closer. Louisiana, read closer. Miscarriage and ectopic pregnancies would be fine. The benefits are related to how their ideal American worker, right?
hmm
Should also protect religious employers who pick and choose who they work with.
yeah, that was oof, that was a tough one. I'm not gonna lie, that was I actually couldn't believe he wrote that. Like
Yep.
that was but the thing is he like caveats it somewhere.
Explain why that is so like wow to see that in black and white.
I mean, basically, he's trying to say that employers should be able to hire people who are identified with the same religion as them, which is a discrimination in and of itself. It's at its core. It's and he I think they were saying, employees should be free to run their business according to their religious belief. But then he caveats with like non general non-discrimination notwithstanding. How is that notwithstanding? Like I don't understand. Like
Like they use these words. So like the theme, right, is the non-partisan civil servants loyal to the president's agenda.
Mhm.
That's not what nonpartisan means.
Right. Yeah. And then they're talking about, I mean, he literally says in there, he said, notwithstanding general discrimination, but then he says
Right.
employers may be able to make
Non-discrimination
employment
laws
decisions.
notwithstanding. It's a
Yeah,
direct quote. Yeah.
yeah. It may make employment decisions based on religious, regardless of non-discrimination. Like, okay, you're contradicting yourself here. At one point, you're saying they need to be able to do what they want, notwithstanding not general non-discrimination laws. But then employers may make employment decisions based on religion, regardless of non-discrimination.
Right. I'm blanking on the name of the case, but you're going to remember it. But it's the one that just came out, and it was a woman who, if she did a business designing websites, for weddings, she would not want to do gay weddings.
Yeah, she didn't want to do a cake. She didn't. It was
No, no,
a
no.
cake.
It was the most recent one was designing websites. The reason
Okay.
why I'm naming
Yeah,
one in
maybe I
particular,
had no. Tell me more. I haven't
okay,
heard this one.
I
I'm
can't
I'm
think of the
I'm
name
on
of
the
it.
cake one still.
It'll come out to me by the time this is over. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes. But she is not currently in business designing wedding websites. She won this case that she has the right to not do gay weddings and specifically state that she does not want to design a website for a gay wedding for a business that does not exist yet based on her religious views. She lives in Colorado. So she wins because it is perceived as, and this is kind of a theme within other chapters too, is that as a business person, you get to take the risk and identify who your customer is. So I probably very unpopularly, if we go back to making cakes for gay weddings, I think that there is some room. That is not a legal term. But there is some room. If there are multiple cake makers, you get to specialize in being vegan cakes. And if you are make vegan cakes and someone walks in and does not want a vegan cake, you don't sell not vegan cake. But here are other cake stores that sell not vegan cake, right? If being vegan is not a protected class, being gay is.
Now I'm 12 years of vegan, by the way. Keep going. Keep going.
Right.
Sorry.
It's why I picked it on purpose, right? So if you go to a cake store that doesn't sell vegan cakes, you might be able to ask, can you make a vegan cake? But that cake store ideally would say, we don't really specialize in that. However, you should go to this cake store that does. If you go to a vegan cake store and you say, can you make a non-vegan cake? They might say, no, we don't do that, but you can go here, right? Even though it's kind of closely related, it's about a protected class. What makes me so angry about this particular case, that it'd be really great if I could remember the name of it. She was not actively in business
hmm
and also a terrible website director. And as a queer person, you can't even do my web. No, I wouldn't even go to you. But their point was that the consumer gets to pick and choose, and the business person gets to choose. I'm self-employed. If I don't want to do a gig, I just say no, I don't want to do it. but I can't say that based on a protected class. I can say that based on my own business standards, or I can price myself so high that they withdraw from the process. And if they're focusing on the free market economy, I just think it's really important to state that there's a difference between equal opportunity to have a risk as a business owner who is hoping to make good business choices that result in higher return on investment or profits, and making choices that are actually discriminatory. And to your point, they actually name that, which sounds like a contradiction to anybody who reads the English language. You can't
Yeah.
do both of those.
Right. And I mean, even before the religion chapter, they talk about the Bostic case. And it seems like if some level he's okay with it as long as it's restricted to the hiring and firing.
Hiring and firing only.
Yeah, but then when you go into the religious chapter and you say, Congress should clarify Title VII's religious organization exempted to make it more explicit that those employers may make employment decisions based on religion, regardless of non-discrimination. You're saying they can go a step further. It's like, okay, well, I'm a gay Methodist. Well, I don't care that you're Methodist. You're gay, so you're obviously not Christian. Get out of here. Like it's like.
That don't make no sense.
No, yeah, there's conflicts here.
Yeah, we did talk about on-site childcare, which I think we'd be like high five. Yep, let's do
Yeah,
more of that.
let's go
Right.
for it.
Um, can you talk a little bit, because this showed up in the news, about overtime equaling paid time off, not time and a half? When I read this, I thought specifically of my brother who works in a steel mill. And as an employer, I'm like, oh, you are ripping people off because not everybody can take vacation or paid time because of other family obligations, other jobs they might have, or they just don't want to.
Right.
Overtime is often calculated into how people are living and surviving.
Hmm.
In my understanding, I mean, my brother, I would say, is very much fits into this category, is that if you eradicate, not even making, we go back to pro business, the business choices are being removed. It is being suggested that zero overtime happens because then it would change the marketplace and employees would want to go work at places that have overtime versus places that don't. So just no more overtime. But if people are working overtime, then they just get paid in benefits instead of actual money for
Right.
overtime hours, holidays, emergencies, all hands on deck situations, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that people understand what overtime. If you're salaried, you might not ever get overtime. So
Yeah, I haven't had overtime a lot, and that's actually a ripoff, by the way. But keep going. Sorry.
yeah, no, but can you talk a little bit about it? Because I do think that that little bit did get some attention, but I don't know that people really understand what it means, especially if you're salaried or self-employed. I don't get overtime and I work 23 hours a day, right? But for people who earn hourly wages, overtime is time and a half for
Hmm.
what's over 40 hours a week. So
Right.
I wrote this down because I really do think that this is important. So if you work more than 40 hours a week, in theory, currently you could be available for overtime. What it's suggesting is that you take a broader chunk of time and even it out. And if it evens out to extra of what 40 hours a week would be, then you would only be paid in additional benefits.
Right. So
What
so
happens if you die? You get
right.
killed at work, you're in a car accident. Your family doesn't get those benefits.
Yeah, this was an interesting part, and I actually had to read it a few times to make sure I like, am I getting this the way? But first of all, he starts out this section saying that, this is woke nonsense.
Woke nonsense. Yep.
By the way, time and a half overtime has existed for decades, long
Right.
before the so-called. I don't know what he's
And
talking.
also, it originated like the Monday through Friday work week.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank
I don't know.
you,
I don't
labor
if this is
union.
woke, man, wake me up, please. Oh
Right.
my goodness. So
Labor unions. Thank you. Thank you for your work.
so this isn't some Biden or Obama. They use a Biden or Obama. I wonder if I did a control F search for Biden through this whole document, how many times his name would come up? A lot.
Not as many as China, but it
Yeah, a lot. But it's but so first to call this woke nonsense is ludicrous. but I think he is saying that that the private sector should have the option between choosing pay time and a half for every minute over 40 hours or accumulate paid time off. Which and so I'm assuming the way I read it was employees have the ability to choose between receiving time and a half or have paid time off. That mean I get to choose which one. Do you want to get money for every hour for every second you work over 40 hours, or do you want to be able to accumulate paid time off, which gives you the flexibility to say, hey, I've accumulated this paid time off. I'm going to go on vacation and you have to pay me for it while I'm on it. You know, as someone who's done both overtime and paid time off, I don't really have a preference. And if I get to choose, because he says allow employees in the private sector, allow employees in the private sector. So I actually don't think that's a bad thing. Like when you first are, all right, do you want time and a half? Do you want um, time and a half overtime, or do you want paid time off? I think giving workers a choice on which they would be able to have, I think that's actually a good thing. The problem is, again, when we talk about crime in this country, the biggest crime in this country is unpaid labor. Uh, Corporations, businesses cheating employees out of their pay. That is the biggest crime in this country.
It is in a country that was also developed with enslaved labor
Yeah,
during a failed genocide attempt,
right.
right?
Yeah,
Like
right. And so, I mean,
we
I
do
think the
what we
genocide
do.
attempt was pretty effective, but
Yeah.
but but it's they take hundreds of millions of dollars that they should have given for overtime to someone and not paid. And police are not busting down the doors of these corporations to make these people pay. They have to go through a process, and it's a laborious process, and you may be retaliated against because you file. So I think this option is a good option. The question is it going to be applied fairly? Now, again, that's beyond the scope of this article or this section, but I actually don't disagree. I think giving me the option to choose between overtime or paid time off, some people may prefer paid time off where they go on the vacation and get paid or and
Right,
while they're
but
on vacation. So
you are bringing woke nonsense back into this because this is about individual employee choice,
yeah,
right?
yeah, I'll say that
We're not
like
talking about employees, we're talking about the quote American worker, right? So
yeah.
even when we talk about Sundays, right, is that
Okay. Yeah.
by organ businesses based on their religious practices get to pick and choose whether or not they are open on Sunday. I use Chick-fil-A as an example all the time, is that it's chosen its business practices based on its values and does
Hmm.
not work on Sundays. Some of the franchises do, but most of them close down on Sundays. It gets to choose that. But none of those employees are getting paid anything on Sunday. And they're upfront about it. They talk about it. Maybe they do inventory or something while the place is closed. But same thing, it mentions specifically like sundown times, Friday through Saturday, which I thought was oddly very religiously inclusive. But it's also mandates that telework would be 10 hours or more would of work would actually count towards that because it does not like working from home or remote work. And
Yeah,
for
I was surprised it even mentioned like
yeah,
according to Mr. Barry, it's okay, but it has to be done a specific way, which is actually opposite of what's happened right now.
right.
Yeah, so
Like I know people who I thought this is kind of interesting and again self-employed, I don't know. But I know people who and he uses the term side hustle. I know people who have multiple remote jobs. And I mean, if you got it, they set up different laptops for each job. And if you can do time management skills, like
mm,
knock yourself out, like work as hard as you want to, as long as you want to. That's the American capitalism way, right?
mhm.
But it's actually, if it were to, and it says it doesn't like guidance or codifying things in a way other than through Congress. But if it's laying down expectations that we're not going to have over time, because we're not going to let employees pick the way they want to receive benefits or not, but is actually creating a standard where unless you do something more than blankety blank, it don't even matter. It's, to me, it sounds like it's codifying labor that doesn't get paid. Instead of that being illegal, it just becomes like a Wednesday. I'd pay attention to that if I were you. Um, there's some mention about franchises and joint owners and what that means and who has the right to pick and choose things. Again, the idea that some over organization is creating rules that dictates down here, that's what it don't like. So if that's
Yeah,
federal
but
government,
that goes against small government. You know, that goes against small, like
that's
there's
not
this
how
contradiction.
franchises
You know what
work.
I'm saying? That like if you read this entire document, probably like they have these we got to go small. Wait, but we also got to check like, all right, what do you want? Like, what do you? Well, I know what you want, but you keep going into conflict with yourself. You're fighting against your own self. So yeah.
Yes. Yeah, the contradictions of their own statements. This is why I say that it's the writing style is like I cleaned off my desk and threw in all the post-it note grievances that were under this particular chapter. So that seems to be a theme. Obviously, environmental social governance standards, ESGs, throw them out. But those are commitments that business owners make to their own way or manner in which their organization runs and its commitment to corporate social responsibility. But because it's typically related to racial justice or the climate, eradicate them.
Of course,
But
yes.
they're opt-in quantitative measurements based on their shareholder experience. So again, we say that this is all free market, free business, but only certain kinds of businesses, because if you have a diverse marketplace, then these folks feel peer pressure to do, and they don't want to feel no peer pressure. They want to eradicate it. And the peer pressure isn't legal binding, it's social guidance of what you're supposed to be able to do. So then they invoke California, for example, peer pressuring conservative states to be better employers. What a bunch of woke nonsense. I wish I was kidding, but like this is
No,
actually
I
what.
mean, yeah, I think, and that's the trick about reading this chapter and many other chapters, not just this chapter, but is this chapter, you really got to read and reread to say, hey, did you notice you said this here and this there? It's like, yeah,
What you
it's
doing, buddy?
interesting. It's
Yeah.
very interesting.
Last thing I'm going to say, and then you get the last word as far as kind of like what do we need to be thinking about or doing. I'll see if I come up with something too. But the last thing that I think that needs to be mentioned in light of the conversation that happened after inauguration is the H-2A and H-2B seasonal visas that generally are for agricultural workers during harvest season.
Hmm.
That the numbers that are given out have to decrease in the next 10 to 20 years. Why? We have a visa system to outsource in harvest time when we need more labor, and we have a backlog of people who are interested in those visas to do that kind of work when it is seasonally relevant to need more employees at that time. Just that's a post-it note on a desk. Somebody wants it done. All right, well, let's put it in there. I don't understand.
Yeah, and even when he gives the alternative view, he doesn't uh he talks about farmers having to increase wages, raise the prices of food if we got rid of this program. Okay, so why do you want to do this? Like, yeah, so
All
I
right, the agriculture chapter talks about it too, and that there's all these different insurance policies. This is another just example. So insurance policy people are businesses, right? They have workers, so there's a labor relation there. So farm and ranch owners buy different kinds of insurance based on their crops, their land, the weather, the produce, or what's produced, as well as employee temporary or permanent insurance. So out of one side of the mouth, it talks about how like That's their choice. They can pick and choose how much insurance to buy, and those insurance companies get to pick and choose what their rates are going to be. Great. Next side of the voice. None of those insurance companies should have any federal or state consistency or unification in regulations of what those prices could be, because this is my favorite part. Those farmers and ranchers can choose to be farmers and ranchers in different states. I can't move my farm. Anyway, I know. I mean,
Yeah, that part it was a really interesting read. It was he didn't do a he didn't do a great job of justifying
mm-mm,
why he wanted this, except for like we need to hire more Americans. But every time he gave the alternative take, it was like, oh yeah, I don't want higher prices. Yeah, I don't want like what?
right.
So and it looks like he's trying to, create subsidies to hire more Americans and to use automation. This would be a really interesting conversation if I could actually talk to Mr. Barry. Like, all right, what are you saying here? Because your alternative
Can
views
I
are
buy
exactly
tickets to that? That would be amazing.
yeah. So
Okay, so regular normal people. Here is my suggestion. Joshua, you figure out what your suggestion would be. So my suggestion is going to be number one, there is an active assumption that your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual worth, and I'm using that word on purpose, is directly tied to your ability to work. So even if we start talking about disabilities, all the disability programs are being suggested to come with expiration dates because your physical, emotional, spiritual, or mental disability expires and you should just go find another piece of work eventually. There's no recommendation for permanent disability status, or at least that's the goal of where it's headed. So inside the Department of Labor chapter, what I'm going to say you need to do over spaghetti is think about what kind of labor you are currently doing and how you are getting paid. And how does that differ than other people in your household? How does that differ within your like sphere of responsibility? I want you to think about like your parents, family members, children, teenagers. What kind of apprenticeship or internship programs are people doing that they're physical bodies, mental capabilities, spiritual or emotional availability is being codified into labor for somebody else's profits. If you can even just notice how many different systems people are getting paid in exchange for their physical abilities, I think that alone is going to be revolutionary. Then go one level out, and I want you to think about your greater community. Who are the number one employers? How are they paying people? Who's salary? Who's hourly? Who's grant funded with state or federal funding, especially after this week, and who isn't? But being mindful of those kind of differences, I think, is a really important exercise because most of us just know how we're paid for our labor because we live in capitalism, that we have to figure out how to pay and save for when we can and can't work. That's my big suggestion. What's yours?
you know, with everything happening, I think my suggestion to the world, or to people living in the United States of America, um, is you have to do the flip of Project 2025, but you have to do it for every person that lives in your community. You have to decide, what kind of community do I want to live in?
Mhm.
Uh, and you got to think about it in regards to education, and in this case we're talking about labor. Like what kind of workforce and community and the right to have access to a job do we want? um what the heck, I don't know what just happened.
No worries.
I'm
It,
sorry.
it's okay. While you're fixing your phone, I do think being able to ask yourself, what do you want to be doing? I think
Right.
I can hear a bunch of my friends saying, well, I don't want to live inside capitalism.
Well, right, but see, and I'm glad you said this because this has been a big thought of mine. This has been a huge thought of mine. Um, you can't. A lot of people want to jump to the end and not understand that they're incremental steps to get there.
Right.
I've done dialogues and facilitations, and I was just thinking about this morning, so it's funny that you mentioned this. And I'm asking, imagine your perfect world, and we're having this discussion in the context of we're here to create new policies and procedures to build a stronger community. And they're talking about, oh, everybody walking through fields and holding hands. Like, no, okay, all right, no, no, let's come back to reality. All right, like in a world, what world would you like to live in regards? You have to look at where are we now, and where would you like to go, and how do we get there? And I think when we talk about, first of all, again, if you say I don't want to live, I'm not going to argue that. But the thing is, I live in capitalism right now. What
Right.
do I do about the situation I'm in right now? What
Right.
do I do about my working conditions and the ability to put food on the table right now? What do I
Mhm.
do about the ability to provide for my children right now? And so my thing is, I think people have to come together because again, when you look at this section and they talk about, doing away with protections in regards to race, sex, sexual orientation, et cetera, and really focusing on religion and focusing on women with children and focusing on Christian families. Really, like we have to be very careful, and we have to say this: what kind of people have to actually start to converse and create their own plans, create their own visions of community to say, because again, some of these things are actually good. Yes, we need to do more with apprenticeships. Yes, we need to have workforce training programs. Yes, we
Don't
need
require a
on-site.
bachelor's degree.
Right,
Yes.
right. We need on-site daycare. What else do I want in this community? What else do I want? Do I want people to have the ability to get a job without worrying about the color of their skin or the fact that they may have an accent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Yes, because I understand that their ability to provide for their family enhances my safety. I don't have to look behind my back, but it also enhances our community. People are having the ability to pay taxes, which repairs our roads, keeps good schools, keep safe community. We have to think bigger. And so my goal for people who would listen to us talk about this section or listen to talk about the entire project is to say, what is my vision? We have to start having real dialogue, developing plans based upon our local city, school, county, and even state governments to say, this is the kind of community we want. We want a community that cares for everyone because we understand, even as Jonathan Berry hints to, uh, that the ability of someone to have access to a job affects my ability to buy things at an affordable price, affects my ability to put clothes on my back, affects my ability to put a roof over my head. So my thing is we have to do a total reimagining. You do not have to align with what the president says because there are structures in place locally and statewide that may put up barriers and shields to what's happening on the federal level. But I
Mhm.
think it really takes a strong reimagining, understanding how your government works, meeting with your city human rights departments, labor departments, et cetera, to say, hey,
While they exist.
right? Yeah, to say, hey, I think we have to do our own imagining of the kind of community we want.
And
And
I want to throw in two other potential bullets. And then whatever the last thing, if you want to say, which this is beautiful. What you're making me realize too is that some people watching or listening to this, you're an employer. You get to pick and choose what kind of conversation you're engaging with your own labor force of what it is that you're doing to help exchange their labor for your business, right? Like
mhm,
you're profiting off of your employees or your contractors. So, what kind of workplace environment are you trying to set? That's a good conversation for you to have as a human,
mhm,
possibly with your leadership team, and definitely with your contractors and employers. Can you have an open conversation about that? And then the other thing I would say, which is people saying, like, oh, we're getting called socialist and communist. You can't be both. But a lot of people also have never lived under a different economic system. And so then, like, the grass is always greener to something else. I really do want to say that capitalism is an oppressive, awful, terrible force at the intersection of Christianity and white supremacy. And it is or can be the best economic system on the planet that humans have developed.
If you create it with a human centric, not greed centric.
Right.
That's the issue is if your job is to make as much money as you can for your shareholders and not to create an environment, a sustainable, compassionate environment for all stakeholders, which is different from shareholders,
Right.
then your priorities are mixed up.
Yeah,
And
we have talked about in other chapters, we've talked about Edward Friedman's stakeholders versus Milton Friedman's shareholders.
Mhm.
And it is specified that there is no interest in shifting the definition of business to stakeholders versus
Of
shareholders.
course not. Yeah.
Because the only people we give a shit about are people who are interested in the actual investment opportunity, extracting as much profits as possible immediately.
As they can out
That's
of people and planet. Yes. Yeah.
that's it.
That's it.
Well,
And it's unfortunate, which is why we have to be proactive in our liberation. Uh, freedom is something you must fight and struggle for daily, even once you're free. And I think the danger again that I'm seeing, especially in a lot of my friends, is Obama's president. I can go back to sleep. Oh shoot, what do we do? Oh God, active, resist, resist. Oh, Biden's president, relax. Oh my God, he's back. No, you must be ever vigilant.
right.
And I think a lot of times people want to ease off the gas, but we have to create an environment where everyone has the opportunity to thrive and grow, including white men. I have to say that because
Right.
I hear some people say, well, diversity, equity, inclusion is not about white men. I said, well, that's an error because they live in the community. Diversity community isn't about pushing anybody out. It's about expanding the circle so everybody can come in. Because if you push people out, the moment they get back in, guess what they're going to do? Push your ass out. And so we have to create an environment where everyone has the opportunity to thrive and grow. Every family, every religion, every sexual orientation, and so we have to reimagine our communities before people do the reimagining for us. And sometimes if you don't look like those people doing the reimagining, you on the next, you off the ship. And so we have to be ever vigilant in creating the communities we want and creating the freedoms that we desire, not just for ourselves, but for everyone.
100% agree with you. And again, Joshua, this is why you ended up doing this chapter. Thank you so much for your time, your compassion, your passion, your actual professional work that you are doing to support civil rights on a community level, people's labor experiences, and what that means for our greater communities. So thank you, thank you, thank you for being my friend and for being here again. Thank you.